My takeaway from this one is short and sweet. I'm becoming more convinced on a particular general heuristic. You should not end the session with roll initiative. I find that most of the time I have seen it, both in, at this point, CR and Dimension 20. It is actively worse than if initiative had not been rolled. However, in a minority of cases, it's about equivalent. But I haven't seen a situation yet where I thought it was actively better to have rolled initiative than to have not. And I think this is broadly because not locking the players into initiative before the session ends leaves their options much more open than if initiative is rolled. They have time to possibly do pre-combat spells or features if the combat does look imminent, but more pertinently, both the players and the DM are given more flexibility on how to engage the combat, or if they even want to engage it at all. They also have a lot of freedom there. And I want to reiterate, I think that rolling initiative at the end of the session can be equivalent to not rolling it. I think that the Kevdak fight is a good example, but I have yet to see an instance where I thought it was actively better than if the session had stopped just a few seconds earlier, just before the initiative was called. I totally get the instinct for roll initiative. It's typically like a big moment, as combat is one of the main times that our characters are actually at real risk. But placing it at the end of the session removes so much room from the creative planning that both sides of the screen can do between sessions. It actually removes a bit of tension and kind of nervousness from between the sessions, where you don't know if you're about to go into combat, or if maybe you can say that like one extra thing that maybe tips the scales back towards peace. So, like I said, I think it can be equivalent, but I have yet to see an example where I was happier that they rolled initiative right at the end of the session, as opposed to when they don't. And that's... Oh, look at this. They've got the terrain, they've got the lighting. Holy shit. This isn't giving market as much as I would have originally pictured it, but I will say this is already more than I thought there would be in terms of an arena. I will be interested to see maybe like a wider shot or like an aerial view, because I see the Pit Fiend and I see the Elatrix or whatever. I'll be interested to see the overall thing, because they've got these roofs as well. Interesting. There's possibly some interesting stuff here. The Vox Machina buys slaves. Yeah, that's Grog you're mousing over? Oh, that is Grog. Huh, yeah. The fire gutter. What's a fire gutter? Is that a thing? The fire guitar? I don't know what a fire gutter is.
So this is the doorway, the entrance to Scanlan's Manor.
Okay, so there's the doorway. Lava stream. Oh, that's interesting. Hey.
The doorway you could have made.
Also dangerous to them.
Fire off the step.
Whoa. What the asshole is that? Okay, wait. I'm gonna grab a snip, just in case they don't show a better aerial view at any point, because this might be the best we get. Let's see. Oh, okay, wait. Also, good time to check, because I tested out World Anvil's whiteboards and actually found them to be broadly, I would say, useful. Like, I think they were broadly usable. But I have not tried to paste in like an image. Does that work? Paste. I don't think that worked. Is there a different way I can do a sticky? No, not like that. Okay. I mean, it would be nice if there was a way. Wait, let's see. Can I edit? Oh, I can change background. Set background to an image. Ooh, so I'd have to upload the image to World Anvil. How easy is that? This is a legitimate, just outward question. I don't know how easy like that is off the top of my head. Let's see. Okay, so I'd have to open up the File Explorer. Okay, so get a screenshot, drag it in there. I mean, I've used this for, I would say, okay. I've used it for more like normal stuff, but like on the fly whiteboarding, not as much. How userway works? What? I don't care. I don't care. Okay, so if I change background now to 2025 screenshot. Okay. Oh. Oh, it's like the whole. Oh, I see. That's not what I wanted. This is live. We're doing it live. Okay, that's just normal white. Interesting. Use terrain builds for the Kev deck. Yeah. Kev deck is the only one that I can remember at the moment. Mega just seems surprised. So I thought that this setup would be boring, and it's been quite a while since Matt has used terrain. Like, Matt has used terrain, but not often. I'm a little surprised in that vein, especially given the relative importance of this fight. Like, given the nature of this fight, I'm kind of like, really? This? I don't even think the Ripley fight had. I think the Ripley fight had like a printed thing, but it didn't have a full-on terrain, I don't think. It had a really nice drawing that I think Matt did, but it didn't even have full-out terrain. So I think that's where I'm mostly surprised of, like, it seemed like a relatively minor fight to bring him up for. Oh, I guess Vorugal did as well, yeah. I can just draw on this. Maybe I'll do that. We'll see. I don't know. We'll see if I get a better angle of it. But right now, I mean, I love the little loop shape. I like the idea of the fire gutter if it is what I think it is. There's this little spot up above the fire gutter. That's kind of cool. I don't know what this is. This is kind of interesting. But I mean, if I'm just implying what's going on here, we've got a lot of nice separation. So I would say that these are kind of separated into there and there. And then there's all of these extra levels and layers to it. I might get rid of those two and just call this one. Although, that's not even fair because it does change height there, which is nice. And then it's like this one is kind of a single one. Even that's tough to call a single one because you have this kind of interplay with this higher terrain spot here. This is a cool map. I like it. Yeah, I think I'd have to call those 3 separate zones. So then we have kind of a normal connection, dotted, 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 dotted. And I'll explain this for the audience in a second. I'm just kind of going through my own thought process. But basically what I'm doing here is separating off the map into kind of discrete zones, and then looking at how those zones, do the zones themselves have anything like unique that they do? And I think that there's a lot of verticality, which I love. And these actually don't change height, but they kind of have to go down through there, I would say. And I mean, arguably, these could be difficult paths if you wanted them to be. I think it's debatable. Yeah, it looks something like this. There's a lot of nodal separation, right? This side of the map is very complicated. If I was looking at this for my own maps, that's the first thing that I would notice is that this side of the map has a lot going on, and that can make it hard when it comes to evaluation. The fact that this is harder for me to analyze and like takes a little bit more active thought is a good thing. That is a good thing for the map overall. Also, all of these dots should be white. None of them should be red. But these are actually kind of purple paths because they have to interact with this like lava right here to get down to this. So this makes this area very safe from the ground level, which is very interesting. Or you can take this kind of longer, safer path. So there's a lot of safety to be gained up here, which is very cool. Or again, you can take the longer, safer paths. But to actually get up here, here can see down here. Here can see kind of everywhere because also they're one layer up. So they have easy vision on like these two and like down over here. But it's very hard to access it without going around some longer ways that you could easily have someone like a grog or a pike kind of stand watch over. Like I can really imagine someone like a pike or a grog like hanging out right here. And then there's also this place that's a little isolated from the rest of the map. And then there's a lot of variety in here. Like the middle of the map has a lot going on with it. But I almost wonder if it's too much. I almost wonder because this being embedded right here creates this differentiation between these two buildings because this can't see or access down there, which is interesting. I think I almost would have rather it been like the tower is over here, and instead of this wraparound sort of texture, it's just two buildings just to simplify it a little bit, and maybe give more of a reason to be over here. It blocks you more completely. Because right now, this is blocked kind of from only one side, and it's kind of open to either of these sides. But you could make more of a little pocket if you emptied out this house right here and moved that to the right and then had two houses right there. Debatably as immediately visually interesting to me as the Kevdak map. I like this one a lot. A lot more than I was expecting to, yeah. I think at this time, Matt only has the urban set and is repurposing. That would make sense. Because again, I was picturing this like in a market. And there's a lot of interesting things you can do with a market because there's so many interesting people around. And so many like interesting goods, you know, someone selling vats of acid or someone selling exotic animals like we saw last ep. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do in a market. But if you don't have the tile set for it, that can be a complicating factor. I was mostly just going on like, okay, I can see an aerial shot. I want to just like, if I'm looking at this as a player, say the DM doesn't go through explaining it at all. I think that's one of the power of terrain, as opposed to like whiteboarding or even paper. I think terrain is much more instantly like visibly understandable. And so there's also something to be said for if my assumption of what is going on here is wildly diverged from what Matt's ultimate explanation ends up being, that says something. that says something. So we'll see. Hopefully, I don't think it will though. I think it's pretty clear what's going on here. Matt did build the Vorugol battle area. Now the Amusing Stars point out this does kind of look like the Kevdak battle arena. It is. I would argue that it's maybe only to my eye, my critical eye, is it substantially different than the Kevdak arena, but I do find it substantially different. I find it different in that, number one, the spikes, I don't think were as obvious with how to interact with them. So I like the lava moat or the lava gutter more as a terrain hazard, and the terrain hazard does not actually take central stage on this map. It's kind of cut off and it creates a safe area. The safe area on the Kevdak map was where the players started, which is very, very different, very interesting. And the rest of the map involved them getting over there. But I will say, like the it's very different in like a very key way, I think, because it has these two kind of clumps of houses, which I think is the immediately visually similar thing. And then it has the lower area, but the Kevdak map had this area in the middle here. It had it moved up and connected off to this right area. And then it would have had like the moat like moved into the center. I think that at least my gut instinct is that this is going to result in a lot more movement overall. And I also think that this is going to hopefully, although, we'll have to see. I don't know. I'm hoping, my gut instinct hope would be that the enemies are somewhere around the middle in one of these four kind of segments. I think they will. And I'm hoping, I think this is a reasonable hope to have as if you're designing this map, is that the Kevdak map resulted, because the Kevdak map kind of looked like that, and then there's kind of a pit in the middle, and then kind of an area over here, and an area down. Everything about this funneled attention into the center, right? Everything about it funneled attention into the center, which I thought was good. Like from the perspective of the fiction that it was sitting in and how we like came into the fight. It meant that Vox Machina could start up here, whereas Grog started down here, and they could kind of come in and out of that central area. This, on the other hand, has much more of a kind of donut-shaped action area, right? Rather than these houses acting as a, I think they acted more as a barrier in the other one. I think they act as their own action area with a much stronger barrier between them and the main action area. And then we have like kind of a little mini area over here with very little barrier between it. It's very interesting. This little tower here is the thing I'm most interested in, because I think that most of the action is going to happen around in these streets. So the question for the players is getting someone into the power position. And how do you exploit that? Especially with all the flying that Vox Machina has, I think making this a 3-leveled, honestly, like 3.5 levels. I think making this have like 3.5 vertical levels with the pure just amount of flying that Vox Machina has is very smart. We're about to run ads, but I'm going to look more of this. For reference, what is your CR battle map ranking? Right now, Kevdak Battle Arena is my favorite arena. We'll have to see how this one plays out, but it goes Kevdak first, Ripley close second. I think the Ripley one went really well. There's other things about that combat that, whatever. But I think the actual battle arena worked exactly how it was intended to work, and I think that its intention was well placed and well designed. On visuals alone, I think this is already my number 3. What's up? Yeah, I think without seeing more, my main concern with the map so far is that there is possibly too much going on. Possibly that the amount of stuff that there is going on might distract and possibly potentially overwhelm and might lead to just clumping up off ground, which is not, what I would want. But even if I'm a little bit more generous, I think, and do that, there is still quite a bit going on. How far was your guess? What was your guess? 18 minutes? 14:44. Your guess is pretty close, I would say. But the overshot you did. But yeah, I think that's probably a little bit more generous. Probably a little bit better. And even if I combined those two, which I probably could, that makes it a little bit simpler. Yeah. I think I might have, you know what? You did bring up the Kevdak arena similarities, and I do think that's fair. And I think there's an argument to be made for just cutting this segment and making like this entire kind of side of the board a little bit more open. And so then there's some kind of interplay between if Vox Machina wants it to be more crowded and chaotic versus more open, they have a little bit of like Grog could try to tempt out the Pit Fiend like into this kind of area, and then you have like, Vex down here just like raining down arrows where the Pit Fiend isn't going to get like incidental cover from all of the structures. Although the Pit Fiend's really tall, so it's probably not going to get that anyways. But that's honestly just nitpicking. Purely visually, I think it's like my third favorite map that he's made. And it maybe Matt just like needs to think in 3 dimensions, or he needs, that physical aspect to help him. I don't know. But I like it.
Hi.
Here we have Vex entry to view head pop out,
Yes.
as well as Vax, who had just stepped out of the portal. Scanlan, with in front of you the 2 boys.
In front of him. They were in front of him? I thought you were holding up a chain and they were standing behind you.
No, I was holding the chain.
Grog was off here to the side. Here we have Gorix himself, as well as his ally companion, and a number of other slavers or slaves that currently line the streets as part of this, who are now watching as this conflict may seem to erupt here.
Narrate,
Yes.
are there, what are those guards in? There's guards in the city.
No,
I looked for them the last game and they're not around.
Something else that changes things? Is it the fact that the Celestial Boys are there? Matt, explain. Let's see.
I like to phone a friend.
I got it from the last
Virtue
time.
like no friend. Never.
Oh, the fact that the mansion is there? That's fair. And Matt did place the mansion. Oh, God. How would I even represent the mansion? That's like, we would have to take this into like a 3-dimensional space. I need to like turn this entire plane like sideways. And then we have like a curly path leading off this way into the purple dot. Yeah, pocket dimension your sketch, yeah. But it is, to be fair, I do think it's fair to bring up when we're looking at this, because I doubt that Matt had this map, planned last session. So he's making this entire battle arena with the knowledge that Scanlan's door is in it. And so where they are placed in this is purposeful. And with that said, I like the placement of it. Gonna be really hard to represent on a 2D plane, but if I'm going to place an extra dimensional safe zone where the allies can enter but the enemies can't, I am absolutely putting it right here in the middle. You don't want to place it in too much of a safe zone. You want it to act as this kind of in-between safe zone, this like potential stopover point throughout the rest of the map. And I think the map is more interesting on this side of it, which you need a variable amount of interest. That's not a critique. That's a good thing. This side of the map has a lot more wacky, weird stuff going on than this. And so placing it well within the wacky stuff, but also in an area that obviously makes sense in the fiction. You can't place it on top of a roof. They weren't on a roof when the fiction started. So it's got to be on street level. It could pretty much have been in like one of these 5 spots. And out of those 6, I think this is absolutely the top one where I would have put it. Yeah. Because it's the center of all that action. And it's right next to potentially the most hazardous area, which introduces a slight bit of risk reward, which I like. I did notice it, but I didn't think about it in terms of the map, which I should have. I think it's important to. I do think it makes a big difference. So thank you for bringing it up. Technically, the Pit Fiend might be able to enter the mansion. That was their trick. That's something that I would probably litigate with the player ahead of time. Is like we would have to both look at the text of the mansion and clarify, can an invitation be revoked? Yeah, exactly. How if Scanlan whitelists someone, can he take that away, or would he need to reset the mansion? I would argue, or my gut instinct would be that he can take it away. I'd say that it's like, especially with the way that they play it, they clarified at Fort Daxio that Scanlan has to actively be there to like facilitate the entry and exit. Like the way that Matt described it at Fort Daxio, Scanlan had to be manning the door. So within that, I would say that he has pretty active control over the entry and exit. I'd say he can actively take it away if he'd like. But I do think that the spell is ambiguous enough that you could rule it otherwise. Not being able to take it away leads to a lot of interesting edge cases, but I'm not sure if it's fun. I think maybe like a political intrigue focused campaign, not being able to revoke entry leads into a lot more like vampire type stuff, shape changer, political intrigue, traitors, backstabbers, double agents, what have you. I think if your game is focused on a lot of those things, like the entire campaign, I think it's interesting to have to like reset the mansion essentially, like unsummon it, reset the whitelist. But if you're not in one of those campaign tones, I think I'd let him have more full control. I'd rule as long as they've not entered the mansion, he can revoke the invitation. Yeah, I don't think he can revoke it once they're in there, but I think he can modify the doorway permissions at all times. I don't think it would prevent someone from leaving. It's basically like if someone enters and then he doesn't want them to enter again, even if they're still in there, he could tell the door, don't let them enter again. And the door would still be able to let them exit, but then if they tried to turn around, they're blocked. That's probably the way I would rule it. I would rule that the rules only apply to entering, not to exiting, and that he can set them at any time, and then they are checked whenever someone tries to enter the door. I think that's what I would go with. I would think it could change with each casting, but not while it's up, but I guess up to DM. Exactly. I think it is very ambiguous, purposefully so. And I think it would definitely depend on the campaign tone as to what I would say. I think in my Ghost of Saltmarsh game, how I would rule it. It'll probably depend on what it looks like by the time they get there. But I could see Ghost of Saltmarsh going in a more political intrigue direction where I might make it a, you decide the whitelist while it's being cast and that's it. I could see myself doing that.
There's guards in the city.
No,
I looked for them the last game and
They're not around.
You didn't see me around at the moment, no.
Does this companion have a name like Carol or something?
You don't know?
Carol.
And what's behind the Epiphany where the map disappears? Is there a building there or what?
There is an edge to a building there and part of a thoroughfare walkway.
How many stories is the building on?
I'd say probably 2 stories.
Is that building made of sharp spikes that if we destroyed the building, it would just kill the bad guys?
Probably. However, I would like to ask you all to roll in. Alright, so looking at how things stand here currently, 25 to 20.
22. 24. I rolled for Pike too.
She was in the mansion.
I would say that it is debatable as to whether or not poison of the pit fiend variety would be visible on her skin and in her veins. Now, at the same time, I do think that, I like the general mindset of there should be some value to learning about and researching your adversaries ahead of time. I really like that sort of, maybe not trope, but that sort of process. When I was playing in a Monster Hunter themed campaign, that was like a really decent portion of it. And there wasn't a lot of visual tells, but that was because the theme of the campaign was around researching these monsters and figuring things out. And I would say that not only has that never really been, it's tough because this is something that I might actually be hesitantly in favor of in a normal session and setting, but it feels particularly harsh in a combat that was relatively forced upon them, that was the avenue that they were pushed into if they wanted to do the quest that they wanted to do for meta reasons. And that makes it so hard to evaluate all of the decisions in this because, I might not be too against this in a normal session, but it feels so strange to think about the possibility of someone dying in a session that wouldn't have happened if Ashley didn't have a break from filming Blind Spot. You know what I'm saying? So it feels so... I'm not saying that the sessions should be gimmies, but I don't think that they should be actively more difficult than any of the other Vestige hunts. This is more difficult than the Marrowglade Lock, even proportional to their level, I think. Seems more difficult than the Sondor fight. I don't remember the Sondor fight being particularly challenging. Maybe equivalent to the Ripley fight, And this is also something to be said for like death and like leading up to it is like Ripley had so much lead up to it, so much build up where they were actively seeking out and preparing to fight Ripley. It was a big kind of moment. They did do research into Ripley and like what was going on. And then they got a little careless and they kind of got slapped for it. But this is a strange one because the reason that they're being careless is not an in-fiction reason. The reason that they didn't take their time to research the Pit Fiend is not because of like an in-fiction they need to take their time. If that was the case, they wouldn't have gone on this fucking quest at all. The reason that they're not taking their time is because of the meta, is because of real life factors. So it feels very mean to then put them in a combat that they really should have prepared for and researched. Because the reason they didn't do that is not an in-fiction reason. And I believe in in-fiction consequences for in-fiction actions, right? Not for out-of-fiction stuff. So I don't know. I'm very, very torn on it. You think they won't resurrect her? It's not as if she won't have a body. They'll need to recover her body. You think the Pit Fiend's gonna let them? I don't know. I don't know if they will literally be able to recover her body. That would imply that they win. And maybe they will, maybe they won't. I don't know at this point. But like, I think that, and especially like if we get into like, you know, expected resurrection, that's expecting that they can either escape with the body or win. And I think that this combat was headed in a direction of possibly escaping. And I don't know if they'll be able to escape with her body. But maybe. I don't know. Also, Vex isn't a doctor, so you can argue with whether or not she could recognize poison she doesn't know. If it was like, yeah, but, you know, I don't know enough about poisons to know. But my mental picture of a poison is that most of them have, like, visual cues of a poison. And she's just casting a kitchen sink protection from poison spell. So I think it would just be, can you tell that she is poisoned at all? Period. Or not. I don't think she actually even needs to recognize the poison. You know what I'm saying? But again, I do think you can argue that, and I think that is why he like had her roll an intelligence check. Because I do think that is arguable, that like whether or not she can recognize it. It just doesn't feel like the right time to have those arguments. It feels like this is the time to lean on the side of being generous to the players, right? In like, I think maybe that's where I'm coming from with this, is like, I'm not always the most generous DM with my players. So sometimes I'm on the side of like, nah, like, you know, let them fuck around and find out, you know, that wouldn't make sense. But the context makes me lean on like, man, with the context of everything, it feels like you should be as generous as possible to the players. If there is an argument that can fall on the side of the players, that's the arguments I would be making right now, given the meta factors. And it feels like Matt is almost doing the opposite. I don't know. During this honor fight, they couldn't really hit him since he was going, and he nearly killed Vex. That is true. That's true. I don't know. I also think that it's partially that it doesn't feel like they're even close to beating him. I think is part of how difficult this fight feels comparatively. We'll see. We'll see.
What are you doing?
Does lesser restoration heal at all?
No.
Okay, well, then, I
Doesn't
mean,
heal, but she picks poison.
If she knew there was poison,
I don't know
first
that
thing
she's
knows,
poisoned. So, all right, then I'm going to waste my turn completely and try to cast Cure Wounds on her.
Okay.
Because that's all life I can.
Rush forward, trinket distracting, using your bonus action. You rush forward and put your hands onto Pike, desperately trying to heal her. And as the energy pulses through her body, no effect. All you see is like the wound from the bite of the fiend in her neck. And you see the dark veins. Really,
Now I know it's poison.
Now you know that proximity of poison.
I couldn't have run up and looked at her to know it was poison to see the black around her fucking...
Cool. 27
Play this
without
one
going
game.
trinket.
I think that's super fair. And like, I don't know. That feels like a weak excuse from Matt to me personally. If he's going to have visible poison, I don't even think that's generous on like him drawing a delineation between, well, you hadn't run up yet. I don't know, man. This feels very harsh, and I don't.
Sorry.
27
27
for on trinket. And then that is 14. No, that's a lie. 12, 11.
All right. Good.
And if I move, I'll get attacked.
All right, I'm
Actually-
gonna sunbeam
The only other thing I'll say, I think that sometimes Matt does a thing that I never do, but I don't think his players dislike. He plays an adversarial DM sometimes. I think it's part of their kayfabe. Like the assumptions that they all know not to be true, but they pretend as if they're true. Like sometimes Matt will make comments around like, oh, it's so frustrating that you guys are rolling, or like, ooh, can't wait to try to kill you. Whatever. Like he makes those sorts of comments, and I never take them seriously. I always take them as like he's playing the heel. He's playing into the fictional adversarial nature of their relationship. But this is a moment where like that adversarial fiction is sort of crystallized a bit for me and became not fiction all of a sudden. Like this feels just straight up adversarial. And so it's also tough because I think that like an audience that may not be either aware of or like that aren't assuming that there is that kind of fictional, kind of constructed, fun performance aspect of it, if they don't pick up on that, then they think that a DM like should be trying to kill his players or whatever, like then that might draw their anger if he doesn't do this. But man, oh man, do I not like it. This is during the height of the Twitter DM feedbacks. They became so oversensitive to avoiding metagaming of all kinds, as far as I can remember. I can imagine. Metagaming is like the boogeyman of D&D. And I get it. My players avoid metagaming at all costs. They avoid it way more than me. So I very much understand the mindset. But I think you have to weigh it against the literal metagame factor of like they would not be here if it were not for metagaming. And so, but like also they should be here. They should be on this quest to like highlight Pike and have fun with their friend. Like I'm totally in support of them doing this. But you can't then, I don't think you should then treat it like all the other stuff. I fully understand it. But man, oh man, it's just tough for me to watch it and be like, why so harsh, man? Especially after Tiberius, I think even months later, metagaming was still a big concern. I get it. And that's like the ultimately tough part. It's hard to watch, but I understand his mindset and where he's coming from. And Matt was probably going to get flack from all sides, and there was no way he was going to get criticized. No way he was going to not get criticized. I agree. I think he's going to get criticized no matter what. I do think that they're having, talked about D&D amongst my friend group and in person, amongst my own community, and then also having been somewhat active in like r/D&D and like that, those sorts of Reddit threads. I think that the crowd that will manipulative DM is louder than the crowd that will cry too harsh of a DM. I have definitely found in my experience online that the online crowd is way more into the adversarial sort of gameplay of like, it's just the DM's job to present the world, and they should run things 100% how they make sense in the world, and if they don't, then they are manipulating the players for their own sick, twisted gain. I think that crowd is much stronger on the internet than I've ever seen it in person. And we've had conversations in this community where people in the community have claimed like, oh, Matt's like just running the world. Like they've made those same sorts of points, but nowhere near the level and like hostility that I see in places like Reddit or Twitter. So all that is to say, like, I get it. It's just, man, is it tough for me to watch. Man, is it tough to... Yeah. Also, at this point, I don't remember the conversation having started of avoiding adversary DMing it. That was not really a conversation that was had. I think still to this day, adversarial DMing is not seen as like an inherent negative thing. I think in a lot of cases, I still see it presented as a tonal thing, which I fully disagree with. But I think especially at this point, yeah, adversarial DMing, I think was seen as like somewhat of the standard, like the way that you should. Like the DM is on the side of the monsters and the villains, and the heroes are on the heroes' side. And they're pitched in like a battle against each other. And so all that is to say, I fully understand his mindset here, but it's so hard when I think broadly he more puts on the show of it, which I think can be very fun. But it's like this one is tough. I don't know. Yeah. And I meant flack from the players, like Laura's short response. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, he's going to get flack either way on that. Yeah. I agree with you. Man, yeah. With the whole who resurrect. Oh, yeah, I did take it relatively seriously. Whoops. That's my bad. Yeah. It used to be the default, the only way to do it. Yeah. One, I mean, even if we look back at a more historical context, like D&D does spawn from wargaming, which is adversarial in nature. Like wargaming is much, much more like inherently. So the roots of D&D are there, and the, people that grew up playing it are going to remember it more that way. But it is really, I think the medium has changed a lot. And one of the reasons that war games can be adversarial is because they are incredibly more gritty, and the DM or the GM in war games oftentimes is incredibly more constrained. Like DMs in 5e are left to fucking just go nuts on anything. And part of the reason that I always say that D&D is not an adversarial game, like is not the same as chess, is because the DM is not constrained in the same way that the players are. The DM will always be able to win, no matter what, in 5e, if they're really trying to. Whereas in like old war games, that's not always the case. There was like a legitimate balance to what a DM could do. Even if you look at more modern war games like Warhammer 40k, that's still the case. So, like, I understand the mindset coming from those sorts of games, but I think it hadn't really percolated out the just amount of god level power that a 5e DM has compared to those older DMs, and how you can't run it adversarially when the DM has that much power. I'm gonna go ahead and just say this. Spicy take time. I hate the short form D&D content that kind of perpetuates DMs antagonizing players. These repetitive DM versus player skits are getting frustrating to me. Yeah. They've found a thing that works. And especially if you look at this is content brain coming out. If you look at something like TikTok, no one goes to a TikToker's page. It is an incredibly small amount of their traffic. So them reposting the same thing over and over and over until it just hits, or at least the same type of thing over and over and over, is like the way that you are successful on TikTok, because timing doesn't matter. Whereas with a YouTube, people do actually go to a YouTube page. Not often, I'll say. Timing on when you post things and how repetitive you are matters more on something like YouTube than it does on like TikTok. But even shorts are starting to get repetitive on YouTube for a very similar reason. No one goes to the shorts page on a YouTube channel. So yeah, I think that there can be a funny bit about like DM versus player, whatever. But I also think that it really hits on the same thing that a lot of social media hits on, which is like anger. It makes you angry. It's like, oh, how dare the DM do that? Or like, oh, what stupid players. And like all of that sort of anger content gets shared more heavily. So it's an unfortunate social media thing. The Reddit stories are entertaining, but I feel like many aren't real. So much of Reddit is like just creative writing. Generally something I like. Players find themselves in a scenario. DM reveals a big thing that screws them, most times unfairly or punitively for their scummy behavior. Cute evil laugh for DM. If you have to give your BBG a twist that punishes player for shitty behavior, you shouldn't have let that game get to that point to begin with. Which this is like, I've said it a couple of times, but I'll say it like really like individually and bespokely, not embedded within any other point. I fully and fundamentally, one of the reasons that I started playing D&D and the group that I chose was because of my belief in this, is I do not believe that in-game actions should have an effect on out-of-game relationships and vice versa. The game stays in the game. The world stays in the world. It doesn't matter if someone was late to show up. That does not mean that I then like have all of the adversaries in the next combat target them. That concept of real life things having in-game negative consequences, that can insert itself into the game in insidious ways. I think it is the root of the problem right here, is that the reason that this is going poorly is because of out-of-game reasons. I truly do not believe it is because of in-fiction choices or like in-game choices that the players made. I think it is largely to do, majority to do with out-of-game. So when that is the case, I will try to be as generous as possible, as giving as possible within the fiction, because I know that if they're acting a little bit differently or a little bit erratically, there's an out-of-game reason for that, and I'm not going to punish them in-game for that behavior. Even though the out-of-game is bleeding into their actions, there's a reason for that. It's like if someone's maybe a better example of like the way that it can sort of insidiously work its way in that's more immediately grokkable is like if I know that like a player's having a really bad day, say their dog just died, and they're not talking a lot because they want to show up, they want to hang out with their friends, play D&D, but they're in a bad place. They're having a bad day, week, and they are a little quiet, right, at the table. And maybe they're a bard. Maybe they're normally the face. If they walk up and, try to do their bard thing and persuade the guard, but real life them is just like not really able to bring it that day, I'm going to be really generous with that DC. I'm going to be really, really generous if they can't like come up with, quite the right words. I'm going to be really generous with like, just taking their intention from it, because I don't want the real life to fuck over their character just because they still want to show up and like play D&D and have fun. So it's I don't know. It is trying to not let real life stuff negatively impact the character in the story, because that will carry through beyond the real life stuff. That's my big problem with it, is that it will carry through and you'll still be like fucked over by it sessions maybe. So yeah, it's and DM versus players, I think, an extension of that. The XP level 3 Sigma DM skits play on this and are super funny. I have not seen a lot of XP level 3 lately. I used to watch him years ago, but I fell out of my feed a little bit. DM most players should have. I try to be. Much like my YouTube channel, my community, I want my tables to be approachable. I want the most amount of people to have fun most of the time. There are always going to be exception cases. I'm the same way in social situations and on stream. Like, I very much consider myself like a vibes manager. Like, I just want everyone to be having the maximum amount of fun possible in any given moment. Sometimes the maximum amount of fun is low, and what different people derive fun from is different. So that's why I'm trying to constantly try to figure out what is like fun to that person and provide that. I don't think that this is fun. I don't think that this will be satisfying. We talked about stream a while back, you liking to be a vibes manager. Yeah, it's weird because I don't even know that I necessarily like it, but I find it actively troubling to not do. It's not a compulsion. That's too heavy of a word. But it's something that actively bothers me if I'm not doing it. Which is generous, but also not your responsibility outside of GM. Yeah, this is maybe something I should talk to a therapist about at some point in the future. But, like, it is that kind of compulsive thing of, like, I wouldn't know how to not do it. I'm always wanting to raise the average enjoyment and satisfaction level wherever I am, which is very tiring. But it would be just a frustrating experience if I didn't. So, I don't know. You can't manage other people's. This will be illustrative of as good of a person as I think I am. I do have the influencer ego of my gut thought reaction to that was maybe you can't. Maybe I can though. Yeah, dude. I'm just like, dude, if we're being really, really honest, it's not a maybe. In my head, it's not a maybe I can. It's a you haven't seen me. You clearly don't know me. I'm just built like that, bro. I'm just built that different. Do you feel like you wouldn't be welcome if you didn't always make things better? If we're digging down into the childhood, wherever this was built, probably. But like, No. It's just that it truly, at this point, it just bothers me. I don't even, like, I think that most of my friends would be down to hang out with me if I wasn't trying to act manage. But when I have tried to not, it's like, someone pick it up. Someone like, that person is being left out right now. Why is no one going over and talking to them? I know it's not my responsibility to, like, rope them in, but no one.
Does this seem, yeah.
The stat says a pit fiend should have 300 HP. Does that check out? I haven't been paying attention. That's what I'm saying. We could figure this out. I could go back through the combat and count up all the damage that they've done, and we could get there. And it's also possible that, you know, he rolled the health for the pit fiend. So the lowest the health for the pit fiend would be is, what is that? 5.5 times 24. 5.5 times 24 plus 168, I think. Oh, wait, no, that's not the lowest. That's the average. So the lowest the Pit Fiend health could have possibly been, if it was rolled, is 192. It's possible that they did 192 damage.
Yeah.
I just found a Reddit post that lists the fight turn by turn. Do you want me to link it? Sure, why not? I have the general chat opened up in Discord because I don't think it'll let you link it in YouTube. I think it's very possible that it was totally legit. But even in terms of, and I'll add kind of a fourth sort of, or I'll do a combo factor to the fourth of, not only did the Pit Fiend not act, or not receive any narration to indicate that the Pit Fiend was bloodied or injured or whatever, but he was also ostensibly not acting like he was 29 points of damage away from death. You know what I'm saying? Like, that is, how much of that health is, how much of his health is that? So 29 over 300. That's like nearly 10% of his health. I mean, he would have known that he was low. You know what I'm saying? So Gurix. Oh, they're assuming that Gurix has 484? Holy what? Round 1 starts. Current hit points. Gurix minus 25. Gurix minus 14, so 484. So they're actually assuming that Gurix is starting with 498? And then minus 14, so it goes down to this. Minus 25, it goes down to that. 47, 91, 36, 6. Holy shit. Percy did a fuckload of damage there. Big B's hand. Gurix minus 26, 21. What was the other one? Oh, another Percy. Another Percy shot. And then Gurix down to 140. Gurix down to 131. Damn. Yeah. So how much would Gurix dead? Gurix 63. And then Gurix down to 22. Then Gurix to 29. How did they know that how much health he had to start? Because I thought that they would be like backwards calculating it. And so now it's like Gurix is 29. But they say he's 22 here. So I wonder how they know how to start at 484. Interesting. I don't see any wiki about it being provably fudged. Not sure the wiki's in the habit of mentioning such stuff. No, and I mean, this post seems to have the knowledge right here of Gurix at 498. First pass, it is not intended to be used to nitpick rules, damn decision mistakes, or math errors that might have occurred during gameplay. It's all part of the game and more generally life. Commit to them, keep moving. Yeah, I wonder how they know. Pretty effective round. See, this is exactly what I'm saying, right? This is the... Did Matt ever say the Pit Fiend was looking rough? I don't remember it ever being said, so the kill was a total shock to me. Yeah. That's... Yeah. I don't need to read through Critical Role comments, but... Yeah. I think that comment sums it up. Of, like... If all that math is to be believed, which I do believe, right? Believe that Pit Fiends have an average of, what was it, 300? So if all of the math that they counted up was right at 484, they way overkilled a standard pit. Gurix had way more than a standard Pit Fiend's worth of health. So it's interesting that it still feels out of nowhere to both me and the commenter and the players, and some to take home. Not necessarily a super involved take. But yeah, I was incredibly surprised when that just happened, and it felt very convenient. But in retrospect, it looks like it was nearly the opposite of convenient. Feels like it was actually incredibly challenging up until this point, yeah. Regarding how much Matt says he does not fudge ever, if it was provable, it would have been a conversation, Twitter at the very least. Yeah, if it was provable, it would have been definitely a conversation, I agree. Crit roll stats said VM hit with 491. Maybe he was holding the kill for Scanlan. Possible. I mean, I'm a fan of that sort of thing. Ryan Immel's rule, his like dramatic timing rule of you calculate the minimum HP and the maximum HP of a given monster. Like if you rolled it, what is the minimum you could possibly roll and what's the maximum you could possibly roll? And then he never has the enemy die before the minimum, and he always has them die by the time that they hit the maximum. And in between, he'll have them die if the moment is cool. I think that's great. It keeps the intended balance of the game because by the balance of D&D raw, you can roll monster numbers. So it's, very possible for it to have anywhere in that range of health. And then you get to also save it for cool moments. I think that's a really slick rule, and that could be what Matt was going for here. I don't, but yeah. I heard that rule from someone else too, but I don't know how I'd feel about it as a player. I've never pitched it to my players before. I always just use average because it's easier. I'm an average taker, and I've told my players that because while that is cool, it's way more to manage for like any given monster. And I try to derive my interest from other places in the scene. But if you're into that sort of thing, I think it's a good idea. I just don't personally do it. Very fudging though, right? By your standard. The ranges, I think it's debatable. I think it's why you're doing it. Because I think that rule actually I would personally claim kind of isn't fudging. Specifically because it keeps it within those reasonable ranges. So like it is always reasonable that they could have killed it at any point after the minimum, right? I think that's why the rule is elegant. Fudging, by my like very broad definition, that rule is focused on getting the kills on cool moments while maintaining the broad challenge, like the general challenge rating. To me, fudging is anything that is trying to modify the challenge mid-flow unplanned. So I would say that rule specifically is actually not fudging by my definition, because it's not seeking to modify the challenge of the encounter in any way. It's just trying to place the kill in a cool spot, essentially. You're going in understanding that the challenge is going to be a little bit variable, is going to be within a certain range. So that's why I wouldn't consider it fudging, especially since it's like the actual range is pre-planned. Yeah. I know that Matt almost always bumps HP just because of his player count. Reasonable. Not sure if there's a standard multiplier uses or if it's ad hoc every time. Yeah. I could have seen it going either way, but it's very reasonable to me that it's not. But I think that one feels more suspicious. And knowing the reasons why, I think, is important. Something like, and it seems like it works best if your players, it does seem like it works best if your players are unaware. I would agree with that. Even if I was into doing it and like I wasn't so into using the average, I would maybe tell my players in like session 0 that I might do this sometimes, but I wouldn't do it all the time, and I wouldn't tell them that I'm doing it all the time. Because, yeah, I agree that definitely seems like it works best if they don't know that you're doing it. And, again, if you don't do it all the time. I think that's a special fight sort of rule. Or it's something that if you can do quick maths in your head, it's something that you could check in the middle of combat, essentially. So if there is an especially cool moment that does a certain amount of damage, you could then evaluate, does it fall into that range, and potentially ignore your pre-planned HP amount. But again, I wouldn't call it fudging because it's not meant to modify the challenge. It's meant to capture cool moments more than anything. Something like that happened in our Pirates campaign, except it wasn't fudging. Another player brought down a sea monster who had killed the father of PC, and another PC brought down the monster 1 HP, and first PC got the kill. Nice. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Yeah. I think if you did it too much, it would feel like you're making the kill about your decision instead of the actions of the players. There's an agency in knowing that my actions dealt the final blow versus what you decided, hypothetically. Yeah. I get that. I definitely get the agency argument there. And I agree. It's something that you wouldn't... This is me speaking as an outsider. I think it's an interesting rule, but to be honest, I don't use it, or at least I never have. Maybe I would at some point in the future, but it would probably be an ad hoc decision where I would see something especially cool, especially like because I use average, I generally know when they're within that range, right? And so something like that where maybe it's a really cool attack that doesn't quite get them to the average HP, maybe they're like 5 HP off or something. I pretty much know guaranteed that falls within the range. And so that's maybe an easier one to knock off the extra 5 HP and call it a kill. Or vice versa, if they're at say 3 HP and the PCs do something that like totally fails, or the monster has a feature that like does like, damage back to them. Think like Pokemon Double Edge. And that attack is like the thing that would kill it. I might let it live for an extra turn because the monster killing itself is lame. I can only speculate as to when you may or may not use it. I think it's an interesting rule to consider, but I haven't personally used it, so I can't firsthand report on how exactly it feels. CR is fully scripted. Fully scripted! The monster analysis link in general in Discord is a good write-up on crit roll stats. They show the HP average and max numbers, and Matt had the total HP way above that. Whoa, interesting. Monster analysis, Gurix the Pit Fiend plus the Illuminated. Armor class is 21. Suggested is 19. Suggested HP 300. 408. Max 408. His Gurix was 484. Boy. Yeah, man. Gurix came with the usual Mercer modifications and increased AC and health pool with appropriately terrifying abilities straight from the monster manual. Yeah. Interesting. I mean, yeah, he's... And I would guess that the Pit Fiend and the Aranus, it probably couldn't stand up to Vox Machina. But there's also something to be said here for like... And this is more of a warning. This isn't a say. It's one of the problems with Vox Machina having so many goddamn magic items and them having so many combatants is that we're wiggling so far outside of the normal bounds of balance in D&D that you have to do, what do you call them? Mercer modifications. You have to start playing with this, or maybe this classic like boss and lieutenant sort of setup, or you have to start getting funky with the arenas or a lot of other with having a lot of combatants. Just broad. The further you get outside of the recommended balance, the more risky and swingy any given combat is going to be. The intended balance in D&D, I'm not even saying it's necessarily like good or well designed. I think it's decent, but it's intended to keep things stable. It's intended to have you as a DM look at it if you're in like a 4v4 and know within reason about how deadly a combat is going to be if everyone's rolling averages, right? And the more you pump them up with magic items that they probably shouldn't have, and the more combatants there are that take them above that 4 number, the more you start to run into these sorts of issues where you start to not be able to predict the combat as much. Same thing if you get further and further out of White Room combat. I mean, the recommended balancing in Xanathar's and the DMG don't take into account a ton of environmental hazards. They don't take into account a certain amount of like traps or ledges or cover on any given map. those modify the challenge greatly. So the more of this stuff that you do, the more you're getting out of the bounds. I think the more mid-combat updates you need to have in terms of how they're looking, the more levers you need to build in to pull as a DM if things are not going the way that you anticipated them going. Not even in terms of like the players are just rolling badly, in terms of like, oh, I did not anticipate the interaction between these two. They're way more powerful than I thought, or way weaker than I thought. So that's what I'm saying. The further you get away from that 4-on-4, and the more you get away from the standard magic item distribution that the DMG recommends, the more your combats might do things that you are not expecting as a DM. And that might be very desirable. I can see it being very desirable, but this is my warning. I do not really care as a player, and I'd rather not know. I trust. Yeah. If you're, and that's why I highlighted it with this, it's looking like everyone is pretty in agreement. All the math checks out that it was probably not fudged, but that final kill still felt weird. So there's a level of, if you want to maintain your players' trust, if you want them to continue trusting that you're not fudging, when you aren't, you have to be careful about those sorts of things. In this case, the kill felt surprising, even though Gurik should have been, if he was going by standard monster manual values, he would have been dead turns ago. But the kill still felt surprising. So there's something very, very real to take away from that. If I can't trust my GM in these sorts of things, I'm at the wrong table. Yeah. I feel like VM sometimes underestimates themselves in regards to what they can actually handle. I mean, there is an aspect to this, and this is also a warning. This isn't something you need to do. But if Matt is consistently bumping up enemy stats, then there is a degree of variability in mechanical challenge versus like visual design challenge. This was a tougher Pit Fiend than a standard Pit Fiend, but it was not displayed as like a jacked up Pit Fiend. Like, it wasn't like when Keyleth scried on him, he wasn't doing steroids and like working out at the gym, We were given no reason to think that this was a tougher Pit Fiend than standard. Pit Fiends are still very scary, obviously. I think that might be part of why Vox Machina might underestimate themselves slightly, is because there's a little bit of variability in the way that something looks versus how actually handleable it is. You know what I'm saying? None of the players would know what a normal Pit Fiend is. Well, yes, but in that case, you need to communicate to them ahead of time how scary this is. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, if you're not relying on the Pit Fiend's general reputation to proceed it, which I don't think you should, by the way. I don't think you should. That it got nerfed. I absolutely believe that shit. I mean, hey, don't get me wrong. I'm all about powerful legendary items. That sort of shit is what I was expecting when they got the Raven Queen armor. And then it was just like, you can change your resistance once a long rest. And then it got wings, and it made a lot more sense. But I fully believe that would get nerfed. It just does so many things. It's like, if it did any of these things individually, it's like +3 bonus to AC, set that, and then give it one of the other things. You cannot be frightened and gain resistance to fire damage. Cool, we can end it there. And then they also get the 2d6, and then the healing flame, and that's a lot. It's cool. It's cool.
You don't have to be shy.
But you're sweet.
Wait.
Small dark box. That's about this big. Here, I want you to take this and do me a favor. This we'll consider our debt cleared. Yes. This box contains the ashes of my late wife in. I've kept them for years and have been intending to make a trip to Vasselheim and bury it beneath the birth heart in the abundant terrace where she once lived and toiled as a girl. I would hope that you do this, and I would consider our pact complete.
Senokir Baxter reveal is super sweet. Neath the birth heart? And she toiled as a girl? This gives me the gut instinct that whatever's in that box, burying it where he said to bury it is a bad idea. That is what I am getting from this. I feel like his wife is like a monster, and it, like, you know, burying her under the birth heart is going to resurrect her in the abundant terrace. Like, and then it's going to release this monster upon Vasselheim. Because no one can get into Vasselheim through their big, thick walls. His wife is a horse. You're so right. I think he's tricking them into being mules. I think that his wife's ashes are the equivalent of a bomb. And they are going to smuggle it into Vasselheim, getting past the walls and the security. And then, dude, what if it's just smoke powder? It might literally not even be ashes. It might just be an actual bomb. And he just wants to blow up the abundant terrace. And like maybe the only part of this that is a lie is that they are the ashes. Although maybe there's no lie. It does contain ashes mixed with fucking gunpowder. And it's literally just a bomb. And it maybe has like an arcane, like remote fire trigger or something. And so they bury it underneath the abundant terrace. This just in, extra, terrorist attack in Vasselheim. Somehow snuck in, blew up the abundant terrace, and has now Vasselheim in Christ. Any donations to the starving people in Vasselheim? Taking here. I don't know, man. And I don't even think that he's necessarily evil. I'm just getting an arcane nuclear bomb. Maybe not even a nuclear bomb. I don't think it's gonna blow up all of Vasselheim. He's just like taking out their food source. I think this is a smuggling operation, though. I think this is an act against Vasselheim, is what I will say. I'm not even going to make a moral, I'm not going to make a moral evaluation, because I don't know. Vasselheim has always given off kind of weird vibes, and you're judging because he's a little neurodivergent. No, I'm judging because he's giving them a box of black powder and asking them to bury it somewhere on the material plane. That for some reason he hasn't been able to do yet. And he's been dodgy about his past. I have a feeling, this is my theory, is that him and his wife were possibly slaves, and or maybe not necessarily slaves, but were sold off by one of the Vasselheim organizations. Maybe they were even like followers of a god because they're tieflings. We also don't even know how old he is. He might be quasi-immortal, and maybe this was way back in the day in Vasselheim, before slavery was illegal, or back when demonic blood birthed him as a tiefling. Maybe that deity was still part of the pantheon back then. And so when that god got kicked out of the pantheon, maybe in the Second War of Divergence, he got sold into slavery. Maybe that's why he's on the elemental plane of fire. Enokir's not a tiefling. Right, he's a fire genasi. He's a fire genasi. The other guy's a tiefling. Senokir's a fire genasi. I know that. I wrote that down. So I think his friend was a tiefling. It's full of DDT, pesticides, and poison fertilizer. That's yeah, maybe. Yeah. It is odd to give your wife's ashes to total strangers to bury. Exactly. That's where I'm like, A box of black powder? We haven't seen the powder. I mean, unless fire genasi ashes are a different color. I'm assuming they're black. Because ashes are like, black, gray, same shit. You wouldn't have been judging if he acted normal. Do not try to say that I'm acting any different. I've been like this since day one. Try and say that shit about me. You can say it about other people. I've been like this. I have not switched. White? They're white? I thought ashes were black for some reason. Black powder, you're assuming is gunpowder. Interesting. I definitely thought that ashes were black. Maybe that's why he's a fire genasi. Okay. Vasselheim, cradle of civilization. My man Senokir is big, vague energy big vague energy about his past. I think that he was a follower of one of the like elemental oriented gods when they got pushed out in either the first or second war. He was either a follower or maybe a son, maybe a demigod, and he got downgraded when they all got pushed out into the elemental planes. Gets sold into slavery, breaks his way out eventually. And so he's got big beef with Vasselheim because he used to be maybe even like an exalted member of the clergy, you know, a high bearer Vord type of position. But when they split off all of those from the Pantheon and said, no, those aren't gods anymore, him and his got kicked out of Vasselheim, got kicked out of the cradle of civilization. And so now he's got big beef, wants to blow up, poison, somehow disrupt the abundant tears. And that's what whatever's in this box is not good for the abundant tears. That's what I'm going to say. Summoning a monster, poisoning it, blowing up, or it's just his wife's ashes, maybe.
It would be
No.
complete.
Can I roll an insight check then?
Sure.
No, not a natural 20. Just that's like the next. This is not my knife. Can I roll an insight check?
Sure, but it's 40 or higher.
Yeah, probably.
He's hard to read. Just by his nature, everything is kind of even keel and strained. Can't keep rolling insight until somebody gets a ridiculous
No,
number.
I can because it was a 4. So do it.
Just the box.
It's more
And that's why you don't let everyone at your table roll individual mental checks. Exactly, Matt. Because if you just let all 6 of them roll insight, eventually someone's going to get a crazy number.
I'd say it's 8 inches by 8 inches.
Okay.
And
Matt, I just rolled a 4 insight check as well.
Cool.
you're all very confused. Well, I appreciate both meeting you.
Where exactly would you like us to?
Just bury it where the nature's roots touches the soil. You should like that.
Where the nature... What? Bury it where the nature's roots touch the soil. The nature? What nature? What are you talking about? How long ago? Is it going to be like 10,000 years?
How long ago did your wife pass?
This would have been
Oh,
4 years.
all right. Well, that seems to have thrown some of my theorizing out the window. I don't think any of this is lies. She died 4 years, 2 months, although he seems a little upset. Or he just counts, which is a thing. He just knows the exact numbers. 4 years, 2 months, 6 days. Okay. 4 years. There's nothing substantial about 4 years, is there? There's nothing that happened 4 years ago. I don't think there is. How long ago did Allura lock up Thordak? His wife is Thordak. No. How long ago did Allura lock up Thordak again? I don't have everything totally transferred to World Anvil yet, so I gotta go back in here. 15 years ago. I don't know that they specify. They said 15 years ago was when he was spotted in Viscan. But I don't know that they specified when Allura and all them locked him up. 15 years? 15 years since Viscan. But we don't know how immediately it was between him reappearing, I guess we should say, in Viscan and Allura and them sealing him in the elemental plane of fire. I think the time gap between those two things, at least, is not in my notes from what I saw. Because he's spotted 15 years ago, pillaging up in the Stormcrest. Allura and Drake attempted to hunt him down, but were thwarted. Then they made the Soul Anchor. Then they sealed him in. Because I don't know when 5 years is an actual number. The nerdiest thing I wish CR Wiki had was, as best we could, an actual in-world dates the episode covers. 15 years ago was the sealing. The date that I have written down was 15 years ago, rediscovered having been ruling Viscan. And that's an early note. I could be wrong. I mean, they obviously could have done it in the same year. It's super possible. But I don't see any details on the time gap between him being discovered ruling Viscan and them sealing him. It could have been the same year. We don't know. I would only assume it was not too far after Thordak killed Vex and Vax's mother and Byrodin. Does CR have a lore keeper at this point? I don't know. Maybe not. It's also like, this is a big reach. I was even starting to say, like, 4 years is not a time span that I recognize in terms of like, there's a couple of time spans that I have in my head. The main one is 4 centuries. 4 centuries has been repeatedly mentioned in different contexts. So that's the big one that I have in my brain is 4 centuries, which is this one right here. Lorded over Marquette, repulsed 400 years ago. But I don't know. I don't think there's anything substantial with 4 years. Although, was there something in Ank'Harel that was like 4 years ago? I don't think there was. Allura said it took a few months to make the anchor. I guess my point is that I don't know how soon, because like he was discovered ruling Viscan, right? My assumption was not that they immediately went after him in Viscan, right? We don't know the break between him being in Viscan and then going and starting to pillage the mountains. That could have been years in between. How long he pillaged the mountains before Allura and Drake went out there to go and check on him. Because, like, there are dragons around, you know, Vorugal. So we don't know how long he was, like, pillaging the mountains. And then it took them a certain amount of time to make the soul anchor. You know, probably a few months. Yeah, a few months. And then he might have been in Viscan and not pillaging the mountains for like a decade. And then he eventually got bored of Viscan and went to go pillage the mountains. That's my only thought about how there could be a pretty large time gap. Viscan 50? No. Viscan is 15. That is the only note that I have from episode 40. Episode 40's where we get info. He was repulsed 400 and then 15 years ago rediscovered having been ruling Viscan. So we don't know how long he was ruling Viscan, period. He was discovered ruling Viscan 15 years ago. And then it says began pillaging. I mean, my notes. But I don't know that we actually know. And then Raishan did find him at some point. Between the 4 centuries and the 15 years. Or she didn't. Again, that's my point, is like, we do not have date confirmations from Allura on when they actually started to give a shit about Thordak. So Raishan could have found Thordak on Viscan 15 years back. You know what I'm saying? Because my current theory is that Thordak was dead for that length of time, for that 385 years. The only thing we have from Allura is how long it took them to make the gem heart. That's the only possible thing there. I think CR at this point is just a checking account and an LLC on paper. Yeah, probably.